You grow up thinking your parents' house is supposed to be your safe place. That's what everyone says, right? But they never ask if the walls ever leaned in your direction. Or if they ever bent toward you at all. I remember standing on the front porch that day, Plano's late spring heat humming against the concrete, sun glaring off the white trim like it was mocking me. I wasn't walking into a memory. I was walking into a monument. A house full of people who called it home. And yet, somehow, it had never been mine. It looked the same. Neatly trimmed bushes, the heavy oak door with the brass knocker, the porch swing that never once held a memory of me. I was the invisible daughter in every Christmas card, standing 2 steps behind everyone else. The Wyatt family looked polished on the outside. But inside? It was all order, all performance, no room for warmth. My mother, Lorraine, kept the place spotless. My father, Everett, believed discipline was love. I learned early that silence wasn't just golden, it was expected. People think you grow up safe under your parents' roof, I remember thinking as I pushed the door open. They never ask if the roof ever bent toward you. Back then, I was 15 when it started to show, when the house reminded me it was never really mine. My aunt and her kids were visiting for the summer. Instead of moving furniture or making room, my mother just stood in the doorway of my bedroom and said, "It's just for a few days. They're guests. You're adaptable." Adaptable. That word hung over my head longer than any chandelier. I packed up my things like I was prepping for exile. My new room? The laundry area. A narrow walkway that reeked of detergent and mildew, with a twin mattress pushed between a dryer and the wall. That night, as I sat holding a chipped teacup my mother had handed me, without looking, without caring, I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was a contingency plan. That chipped teacup. It became something of a symbol. Beautiful, once. Fractured, now. But still used, just good enough for the things nobody saw. I learned something that night: walls don't keep you. Names do. And mine never really fit into that house. Years later, I thought maybe time would soften things. I was wrong. When Everett passed, I found out, by accident, that he had moved the deed to the house out of my name. It had been promised to me. In his words, "Your future is your responsibility." But the title went to Gwyneth. Not a conversation. Not even a heads up. No anger. No fight. Just another quiet betrayal. I didn't cry, I just stood there, feeling the floor disappear. I wasn't losing property. I was losing proof I'd ever belonged. I stopped asking questions after that. Stopped hoping. Stopped waiting. My siblings? Dorian got the business handed to him before he turned 30. Gwyneth had mom's jewelry before the funeral flowers even wilted. Me? I had the chore list. I set the tables. I cleaned up their plates. You'd think I was the help in half our family photos. Some daughters inherit the silver, I once told myself. Others inherit the silence. Funny thing about silence, it gives you time to plan. They never noticed that I stayed up after the lights went out, teaching myself how to code, how to build something from scratch. I wasn't dreaming of revenge. I was dreaming of leaving. And then came the dinners. Family gatherings where I'd carry the plates and refill glasses while they talked about inheritances and vacations and stock portfolios. "You're good with helping hands, Sarah," Gwyneth once said, smiling like it was a compliment. "That's your strength." No one ever asked what I was working on. No one cared where I disappeared to after dessert. I was background. Support cast. The person who held the camera while they posed in the spotlight. But I kept going. Quietly. I remember thinking, during one of those dinners, I used to wait for an apology. Some moment where they'd see me, really see me. But that moment never came. And when it didn't, I stopped waiting. Because an apology doesn't erase being invisible. It doesn't change what it feels like to be forgotten in your own home. So I started building. Not just ideas, but resolve. If they wouldn't make room for me, I'd carve out space somewhere else. Maybe it wouldn't have curtains or a dining table. But it would be mine. My first project was small, a budgeting app no one believed in. Just lines of code on a laptop balanced on a folding table. I didn't tell anyone about it. Why would I? Because when your family's love is conditional, your success has to be silent. Until it isn't. That night, I closed the door to my childhood room, what used to be my room, and felt nothing. Not sadness. Not anger. Just a clarity I hadn't known before. I wasn't part of this story anymore. And yet, I thought they couldn't take anything else from me. I was wrong. I arrived at Gwyneth's house just before dusk, the kind of Texas evening where the air still holds the heat of the day and the promise of cooler night. I saw the lights inside and wondered, for a moment, whether I'd been summoned to belong, or to serve. The front door swung open and I stepped into the crowd of congratulatory hugs for Dorian's new promotion. Business partners shook hands, relatives exchanged how are yous, and there I stood, modest in my dress, clutching my vision. They didn't know I was holding more than ambition, I was holding memories. My mother, Lorraine, slipped up beside me and whispered, "You're good with trays, Sarah. That's helpful tonight." I nodded, measured my smile. I watched the plates pass, glasses lifted, words spoken of legacies and futures, none of them belonged to me. That tray in my hand weighed heavier than any promotion. A wealthy guest, a man in a tailored suit and a brand new tie, mistook me for the hired help. He offered me his coat, asked for a drink refill. I froze. I didn't correct him. I let the label stick for a moment. My mother saw it, she gave no reaction. Later she said, lightly, "Well, at least you blended in nicely." His voice, polite, "Thanks, ma'am." My voice, silent, "I belong elsewhere." Inside, rage flickered, but quiet. Years of smiling while being ignored had taught me how to wait. As I stepped into the powder room and caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw the woman they expected me to be, a help, a backdrop, a keeper of the scene. I didn't recognize her. A woman in the mirror who had carried invisible loads for years. My memory flashed back to my mother's words when I was little, "Keep your voice down when adults are talking." I obeyed. Too often. Too long. Later, the slideshow began. Gwyneth's surprise for the family, a video montage of every legacy, every business deal. I scanned the images. There she was, small, in the background, setting a table, holding a glass, nameless. And the slideshow caption, "Always helpful." The audience laughed politely and I didn't. I walked away, unnoticed. Locked myself in the guest bathroom and stared at my reflection. I'm not here to serve their image anymore. The woman in the mirror looked back, worn but listening. In the car on the ride home I opened my notes app. I typed, Phase 1, Reinvention. I pressed save. I knew I was done waiting for someone else to award me validation. My code, my ideas, my nights alone under the lamp, they all mattered because I made them matter. I wouldn't ask. I wouldn't rely. I would build. I thought about the women I'd met in tech forums, women who shrank so others could shine. I realized, some families don't need to hate you. They just need you small. And I was done being small. I pulled into my driveway, the hacienda lights behind me dimming. The reflection in the front window wasn't me, it was potential. I stepped inside and whispered, just for myself, they'll see me. They just don't know it yet. I arrived at the banquet hall before most of the guests, early enough to watch the staff setting linens and lining up silver trays. It was Gwyneth's charity buffet this time, a fundraiser with her name printed in gold on every invitation. I wasn't listed on any formal program, but I'd shown up anyway. Habit, I suppose. I stood there with a folded towel over one arm, adjusting glasses on a table like I belonged in the prep line. It struck me then, I'd been carrying trays my whole life, birthdays, holidays, dinners, while they carried legacy. The faint clink of plates sent me back to 17, when I came home from prom, dress still damp from rain, hands raw from washing dishes. My parents had left the venue early, left me to be useful. That night, I scrubbed bowls while classmates danced under chandeliers. They didn't ask why I stayed. They assumed I would. They always assumed. I stood in the present, smoothing napkins, and thought, they never asked what I wanted. They only expected I'd do what no one else would. From across the room, I saw my mother motion toward a table of finger foods. I nodded, moved silently. No one questioned it. No one ever had. In a room full of relatives dressed for praise, I was dressed for practicality. The music softened, and for a moment, I felt the ache of ritual, serving while they celebrated. A voice behind me, Mallory, a cousin, whispered to a guest, she works with apps or something. Not exactly the Wyatt legacy. I didn't turn. My posture remained steady as I walked a tray forward, but inside, I marked every word like a tally. I remembered a time, years back, when I'd called my father's attention to a newspaper article about my first patent approval. His one response, good for you. Then he folded the page and asked Gwyneth about her new dorm assignment. Achievement mattered, yes, but not mine. I kept moving through the room, offering canapés, my face calm. Their eyes skimmed past me, never landing long enough to see the tension gathering behind my quiet. The pattern repeated, service was my language to them. They never asked if I had another. At the buffet line, Gwyneth leaned close, adjusting a centerpiece. You're lucky you're comfortable enough with us to pitch in, she said, her tone wrapped in pretend warmth. That phrase, comfortable enough, stung sharper than any insult. It echoed a memory from 15 years ago, when my mother had asked if I was fine using hand-me-downs and sleeping in the attic. As if comfort was something I'd chosen. As if sacrifice was my gift to them. I excused myself, stepped outside into the cool Texas night. The parking lot was quiet, just a few cars glinting under string lights. I breathed, slow and steady. Out here, I could almost forget the watchful eyes. Comfort isn't enough when you were meant for more, I thought, placing a palm over my phone in my pocket. It buzzed, a subtle reminder of my other life, the one they never asked about. I drifted into another memory, 16, in that cramped attic room. While my siblings rehearsed piano pieces and planned destination trips, I'd wedged an old card table beneath a single lamp. Headphones on, code scrolling across a second-hand laptop. That was my concert. My rebellion wasn't loud, it was typed. I remember hearing Dorian brag downstairs about Dad buying him an internship in Dallas, all while I launched a free trial website off a public library server. I didn't tell anyone. Why would I? Silence taught me to work in secret. Tonight, under those banquet chandeliers, I opened an email on my phone, an investor requesting a meeting about that very platform. They praised the user flow, asked about expansion. The world beyond this family saw me. Not as a server. As a builder. I returned inside, straightened my posture. A quote came to mind, something I once read tucked into a forum comment: "The ones they ignore will be the last they question." I typed a new line in my notes: Phase 1, build something they can't ignore. I glanced at my startup roadmap, a focus on elder care technology. Building dignity for those forgotten. Maybe because I understood that feeling too well. This wasn't revenge. This was purpose. When I stepped back into the ballroom, I was no longer carrying a tray. I wore my startup badge clipped to my dress. It caught the light, subtle but deliberate. My father noticed before anyone else. He stared, puzzled, a furrow between his brows. His voice carried across the table: "Who are you now, Serafina?" I didn't answer with words he could hear. Only a steady gaze. Watch me, I thought. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't serving. I was arriving. I walked into the gala lobby under the glow of chandeliers, the kind of lighting made to flatter, not expose. My suit felt too sharp, too deliberate, maybe that was the point. My heart was steady, but beneath that calm something throbbed like a pulse I couldn't ignore. The family didn't usher me toward the red carpet. They guided me to the serve line, trays instead of chairs. I handled it as though I were just another staff member, but I knew the difference in how they looked at me. I remembered nights I spent in my closet turned office coding while they toasted deals and legacies. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, breathed in deep, and glanced at Dad across the room. He didn't see me. He saw a role. A function. Not his daughter. My name should have been on the seating chart, in gold letters, at the head of the table. But I found no mention of Serafina Wyatt. The card: white, thick, red guest staff. The realization hit like silence in a crowded room. Which was worse, a harsh word or complete omission? I stood still, collected myself, allowed the wound to settle. I handed glasses with precise calm. The mayor nodded in passing. Business magnates checked their watches. No one stopped to ask why I wasn't sitting. I thought of a line I picked up somewhere: "You can't be invisible if you decide to be indispensable." But tonight they treated me as replaceable. Later Gwyneth sidled up to me, porcelain smile and chilled air. "You always try so hard, Sarah. It makes people uncomfortable," she said. Soft tone. Sharp words. I felt the needle but didn't wince. Uncomfortable? I'm just showing up. I served the next guest, adjusted a chair, nodded politely. But I remembered Mother's voice at 15, "You should smile, not try to lead." I led anyway. Maybe I still looked small to her, but I didn't feel small anymore. I realized they didn't fear what I could do, they feared that one day I'd decide not to stay hidden. I excused myself for a moment and stepped onto the balcony. Texas night stretched out under the city lights, steady but distant. I pulled out my phone, opened my inbox. There were messages, investors asking for meetings, partners already drafting contracts. I leaned back against the rail, the muffled gala echoing behind me. I'm done polishing other people's mirrors. I typed the heading: "Tomorrow morning, press release from Lab Wyatt Innovations." Fear flickered. Always will. But I shifted. Fear of losing roots. Fear of losing face. But I refused to lose myself. Inside again, mask on. I poured one more drink, set it down at the table where my name should have been. The old Serafina might have waited for someone to ask, "Why aren't you seated?" but not anymore. I straightened my back and stepped away. If they won't seat me, it's time I build the table. The morning light crept through the wide windows of the co-working space, soft and dull. I wasn't at home. I hadn't been for months now. Home wasn't where you slept, it was where you breathed freely. This place, with its flickering lights and smell of stale coffee, gave me more peace than any room in the Wyatt estate ever had. I stood by the vending machine, waiting for the slow drip of coffee to fill the cup. The room was quiet. No shoes clicking down a hall. No voices pitching judgment between mouthfuls. Just me, my laptop, and the press release sitting open on the screen. I reread the line, just once more, founder and CEO, Serafino Wyatt. I stared at those words like I needed them to mean something bigger than the title. I didn't blink. I didn't hesitate. I pressed send. The release hit the wire at exactly 7:01 a.m. My phone lit up with alerts, emails, pings, missed calls. I flipped it over and let it buzz. Today, they'd feel the shift. But I didn't owe them the sound of it. Later that morning, I pulled up to Gwyneth's house for brunch. Her text had come late last night, some sugar-coated invitation after months of static. I wasn't sure why I said yes. Maybe just to watch the fallout firsthand. They were already seated when I walked in. Eggs, fruit, pitchers of orange juice. A curated scene of familial peace. Lorraine didn't even stand, just gave a half smile and said, "You made time?" I sat, calm. Gwyneth barely glanced at me. Dorian, smirking, led with, "Saw something about an app. Just a side project?" I reached into my bag, pulled out the morning printout, Tech Times cover story, full-page spread on my company. I laid it flat on the table. Gwyneth laughed under her breath. "Is this what you needed us to see? We already knew you were trying." I kept my voice level. I didn't come here to ask for applause. I came to set boundaries. She blinked. Confused. Annoyed. I looked them straight in the eye. As of this morning, my company is valued at $90 million. The room stilled. Forks stopped. No congratulations. Just the awkward stretch of silence pretending not to be shocked. Dad muttered, "That's not sustainable growth." I leaned in slightly. "This isn't a hobby. It's a company. And I built it without a dime, a contact, or a compliment from any of you." Gwyneth waved her hand, brushing off my words. "Good for you. But don't expect this to change anything." I nodded once. "I don't expect it to. That's the point." There was nothing loud about my tone. Nothing angry. It was surgical, truth-cutting clean. They had wanted me small, quiet, present only when needed. But today, I'd brought the whole truth to the table, and no one knew where to put it. Lorraine tried to salvage control. "We were only trying to protect you from disappointment." I smiled, tight. "You weren't protecting me. You were minimizing me." That was the pattern. Growing up, it was always, "Don't be too loud, don't aim too high, you're too sensitive." But it wasn't sensitivity. It was awareness. They just didn't want to deal with it. And today, I wasn't naming those patterns to make them change. I named them so I could finally stop dancing around them. I set my napkin down, stood up. I will no longer shrink so you can feel comfortable. I didn't threaten. I didn't grandstand. I just placed the check on the table and walked toward the door. Lorraine called after me, "Where are you going?" I paused at the doorway, not turning around. Forward. Outside, I pulled out my phone. A voicemail had come in during brunch. I played it on speaker. A calm investor's voice, let's talk Series B. But one of your family members reached out. Said something disturbing about you. We need to clarify it before we proceed. I froze. It wasn't about the company. It was personal. When I heard the voicemail, I sat frozen in my chair at the shared workspace. The office lights were dim and muted. My heart sank. One of your relatives contacted us, the voice said. Concerns about your leadership. I looked at the screen, heard the words again, as though they were coming from another room. I had built something real, yet here was a threat floating in the air, barely spoken, carrying the weight of the family's silent strategy. I found an email in my inbox, anonymous report attached, alleged tampering with financials. I sat for a moment and remembered how Gwyneth once accused me of cheating in high school. A lie, then. Another lie now. The office was quiet around me, too quiet. I locked the door behind me and taped the note to my monitor. I forwarded the email to a friend who works cybersecurity. Within an hour he confirmed what I dreaded. The IP address came from Gwyneth's assistant's laptop at the Wyatt estate. I exhaled deep. They were so threatened they'd choose sabotage. I looked at the mug of cold coffee. Strategy, not spite. Let them bury themselves. The next morning I met the investor at the downtown cafe. He was calm, professional. He flipped open his laptop. I had to ask, he said. Family drama makes boards nervous. I didn't flinch. I opened the audit history on my phone, presented the clean trail. My numbers speak louder than gossip, I told him. He leaned back and nodded. You might want to get ahead of this. I nodded. Wounded. But I stayed measured. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I calculated. I showed resilience. Later that evening I received screenshots from a cousin. Gwyneth mocking me in the family group chat, $90M startup? She probably sells Tupperware. My stomach turned. Not because of the words. Because it didn't matter anymore. I screenshot, printed, archived. I wasn't letting this slide. They could talk. I'd build. A few days later I posted on LinkedIn, entrepreneurship is lonely, not because of the market, but because sometimes it's your own who try to tear you down. The post went viral within hours. Industry leaders commented. A new investor messaged, we see your work. Stay steady. For the first time, I felt seen without mediation. That night I sat on the balcony, phone in hand, the city lights below. Gwyneth's name flashed on my screen. I didn't answer. But I listened. Her voice shaky on voicemail, we need to talk. It's bigger than you think. I pressed stop and placed the phone face down. Bigger than I think? Good. Because I thought it was already big enough. I got to the showroom earlier than anyone else. I wanted to be alone with it for a minute. The glass walls still carried morning fog, and the screens flickered quietly. No distractions. Just clean air and decisions. The launch setup was simple, on purpose. No gold lettering, no velvet ropes. I'd built the brand to speak for itself. A few interns were still straightening banners, adjusting mic stands. I glanced at the giant slide behind the stage. My name, bold. Serafina Wyatt, founder and CEO. It took me years to say that out loud without flinching. I scanned the room through the one-way glass. Journalists, investors, tech insiders were already arriving. I didn't look for family, I didn't expect them. I had stopped hoping somewhere between chapter 3 and my first funding round. I adjusted the cuffs on my blazer and whispered to myself, they used to tell me I should be smaller. Today, I choose bigger. The lights dimmed. People took their seats. I stepped on stage without fanfare. No big walk-up song. Just silence. I pressed play on a small audio clip I had queued for weeks. My mother's voice, crisp, unmistakable. Serafina is talented, but she'll never fit our family. There was a hush. I didn't blink. I let the room feel the discomfort. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. I took a breath, leaned into the mic. I didn't build this to belong to them. I built it to belong to myself. I watched Dad's face freeze. He tried to mask it, but he wasn't quick enough. Gwyneth didn't look at me. Of course she didn't. She was never good at holding a stare when the spotlight wasn't hers. I went on. We're not just launching product updates today. We're launching a new division. One designed for those who've never had a seat at the table. The next slide flashed up, plans for underserved markets. Resources. Staff. Timeline. And then came the line that locked the room. Effective immediately, no family member may serve on our board without signing a full agreement acknowledging my contributions. Retroactively. You could hear glasses hitting tables. Lorraine stood up like she was going to say something. But nothing came out. Gwyneth's hand clenched around her champagne flute. I looked out at the crowd. When you set your price, you place your value. I paused. Let that land. I chose the value myself. The applause was hesitant at first. Then it spread. I didn't smile. Not yet. After the speech, I slipped off stage and found a quiet hallway behind the green room. I stared out the side window, the city still humming beneath a soft layer of fog. I thought about how many years I'd spent competing for nods from people who never looked up. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel triumphant. Just right. I called Thatcher. We launch next quarter, I said. No more reaction. We write the script now. He was quiet, then just said, let's do it. I hung up and stood still for a beat. Maybe you don't always need to break the system. Sometimes you just walk out the side door and build something better across the street. The event wrapped and people began to rise. Applause carried as I returned to the stage for the closing photo. My eyes met Dad's. He didn't stand. He just sat. Watching. Unblinking. As I stepped down, my phone buzzed. Text message, urgent, Gwyneth just launched a social campaign. No details. Just that. But I knew Gwyneth. She never played soft. If she was going public, it wasn't just noise, it was war. I turned the screen off, pocketed the phone, and stepped into the hallway. I woke up to a screen that wouldn't stop buzzing, missed calls, unread messages, email alerts blinking in red. It was like stepping into a nightmare, mid-sentence. Gwyneth had gone public, and not just with vague accusations. She posted a thread implying I'd stolen the entire concept for our startup from someone in the family. Claimed I'd repackaged an old idea and called it my own. She even linked to some dusty pitch deck from a cousin who once mentioned building a platform. It wasn't even remotely similar. But the hashtags were spreading like wildfire. Startup scam. Nepotism in tech. Comment sections were turning into minefields. A Dallas tech blog picked it up, and just like that, the media smelled blood. I sat still in bed for a full minute, my coffee cooling next to me. The truth doesn't always win online, I whispered. But it must win somewhere. I pulled out my notebook and made the first call, to my PR rep, then legal. Then my CTO. The war room was open. By noon, we were on a conference call with the board. Jonah, one of our newer members, went straight in. Even if it's baseless, this narrative could poison the brand, he said, pinching the bridge of his nose like I was an unpaid intern. We can't risk becoming radioactive. I didn't flinch. This company was built on transparency and resilience, not gossip. I clicked through the slide deck, dated brainstorm notes, screenshots of Slack conversations from day one, and grainy whiteboard photos with my messy handwriting all over them. Some of the board nodded slowly. But then Jonah dropped it. We need to vote on suspending all public marketing until this blows over. I clenched the pen in my hand. Or, let me speak. Not a PR-crafted statement. Not a lawyer's letter. Me. One voice. One story. The room went quiet. If we hide, I continued, we become the story. If I speak, we reclaim it. That evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my attorney. He'd been digging. You might want to see this, he said and forwarded the email. My heart pounded as I read the header. It was from Gwyneth to a local journalist. The name was faked, but the voice was unmistakable. She faked the whole thing. I know, I raised her. She pretended to be a whistleblower. I sat in my office, the city lights barely moving outside the window. This is war, I said quietly. Not out of rage. But preparation. Gwyneth had crossed a line, fabricated an identity, fabricated a crime. I could sue. I could bury her. But something inside me recoiled. If I stooped to her tactics, I thought, I lose more than face. I lose myself. I chose something sharper than lawsuits, exposure. 2 days later, I sat alone under the studio lights, laptop open, microphone live. Hi, I began, voice steady. There's been a lot of noise. I want to share the facts, from me, not through headlines, not through hashtags. I walked through the development timeline, step by step. Dates, visuals, archived prototypes, emails. No tears, no dramatics. Just facts. The loudest voice isn't always right, I said at the end. It's just loud. I thanked my team, our users, and anyone still willing to believe in the long path of building something real. As I spoke, messages rolled in, support, encouragement, screenshots of people countering the narrative online. I kept watching the viewer count tick upward. Meanwhile, Gwyneth's accounts had gone silent. And somehow, her silence screamed louder than anything she'd posted. Later that night, I finally turned off the lights in the office. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Dad. There's something you need to know. It wasn't just Gwyneth. I stared at the screen. Meet me tomorrow, I typed back. No more games. I met Dad at the same cafe he used to take me to as a kid. Back then, the smell of burnt toast and watery coffee meant love. Today, it felt like a quiet reckoning. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not just older, shrunk by guilt, maybe. He couldn't meet my eyes at first. Just stirred his cup like the truth was at the bottom of it. I should have told you a long time ago, he finally said. I waited. It wasn't just jealousy. Your mother and Gwyneth. They found out about the trust. He rubbed his temple. I set it up in your name years ago. I didn't tell them, I was afraid they'd spend it. I always thought I'd explain someday. He looked up. When your company took off, it wasn't pride they felt. It was betrayal. They thought you went behind their backs. Like I did. It landed like a slow punch. Not surprising. Just heavy. It was never about the bedroom, I said. It was control. Ownership. You put a price on loyalty and didn't tell anyone the terms. His lips trembled. I never stopped loving you. I nodded. I wish you'd told me sooner. I might have forgiven you sooner. The next morning, a letter from the county showed up in my inbox. Property taxes overdue for the house I grew up in. Confused, I called the clerk's office. They confirmed the title was in my name. Had been for years. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, blinking. I drove there the next day. Parked out front, same cracked driveway, same crooked mailbox. But this time I didn't knock. I let myself in. The air was thick with memory. Toys tucked in corners. Mom's old recipes clipped to the fridge. I walked from room to room, brushing fingers over the banister, the old desk, the chipped bathroom tile. Each step stripped away a little more of the story I'd been told, and let me write my own. I wasn't here to reclaim a home. I came to release it. Sometimes, the key to healing isn't forgiveness. It's understanding. I was sorting old family documents when Gwyneth showed up, unannounced. She didn't say anything for a while. Just hovered in the doorway like she was still deciding if she had the right to step in. I didn't think you'd win, she said finally. Her voice cracked. I didn't think you'd matter. I didn't flinch. She sat down. Hands clasped, knuckles white. I thought you were always the favorite, she said, eyes wet. But it turns out, you were just chosen. And I never was. Her apology wasn't clean. It wasn't even full. But it was human. She unraveled in front of me, years of pretending shedding like a coat that no longer fit. I didn't say I forgave her. I said, I don't hate you. We sat together in silence. Two women raised in the same house, burned by the same flame, just on different sides of it. When I left, I placed a key on the counter. It's your home too, I told her. Just not your weapon anymore. Weeks passed. Quietly. No headlines, no shouting. Just space. Then I wrote an essay, When Family Isn't Home. It wasn't bitter. It was bare. Honest. It went viral. People didn't share it for the gossip, they shared it because they saw themselves in it. Women from Ohio to Oregon messaged me. Men, too. Strangers who'd been pushed out of families they once called safe. The essay caught Stanford's attention. They invited me to speak at their Women in Tech Summit. I ended my talk with a photo, me at 16, holding my first clunky prototype. The caption read, I was always enough. That night, after the applause, I checked my email. One unread message. Subject, we might be sisters. My breath hitched. Message, I read your story. I think I might be your half-sister. Please write back. I stared at the screen. Maybe this story was never just mine. Maybe it was about what we inherit and what we choose to build from it.